Again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Practical Impact of the Age of Criminal Responsibility, Perspectives of Youth and Family Members. Again, my name is William Ward, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements for you all to keep in mind. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address technical related questions. Click on the file name and then click on the download button. At the end of today's webinar, you will be asked a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. And for those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go into the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to a brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. And following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance, and this certificate is sent approximately 1 hour before the conclusion of the event and sent via Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye out for that certificate. And finally, the webinar recording of this event will be archived in approximately 1 week on OJJDP's NTTAC YouTube channel, where you can also view additional training resources if you would like. Supporting materials and the webinar transcript can be obtained by contacting OJJDP's TTA Help Desk. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Katie Penkoff.
Thank you so much, William. Welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Penkoff, and I am the Project Director of the Age of Criminal Responsibility Research, Training, and Technical Assistance Center at the American Institutes for Research. Our mission is to provide states with an age of criminal responsibility set under 18 and those who've recently passed legislation to raise the age with the research and data needed to make informed decisions about their justice policies and implementation strategies. Thank you for joining us for the 4th webinar in the series, Practical Impact of the Age of Criminal Responsibility, Perspectives of Youth and Family Members. In this series, we strive to include the perspectives of stakeholders who are impacted by age of criminal responsibility. Thus far, we've been fortunate to hear from Mark Schindler and Jason Zeidenberg with the Justice Policy Institute, Marcy Mistret with the Campaign for Youth Justice, William Carbone, who is formerly the Executive Director of the Court Support Services Division of the Connecticut Judicial Branch, and is now the Director of the TOE Youth Justice Institute at the University of New Haven, Sergeant Ruthie McCain with the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, and Michaela Bowman with the National PREA Resource Center at Impact Justice. Today we bring you the youth and family perspective. Our moderator for today's webinar is Jim St. Germain. Jim is the co-founder of Preparing Leaders of Tomorrow, a nonprofit organization that provides mentoring to at-risk youth, and a board member with the National Juvenile Defender Center. He works as a residential care advocate for the City of New York and has served on the Coordinating Council on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention since 2016. Jim also serves as a consultant and chair of the Age of Criminal Responsibility Research, Training, and Technical Assistance Center expert panel. He recently authored a memoir entitled A Stone of Hope and lives in Brooklyn, New York. To learn more about Jim and our presenters today, please download the presenter bios document from the handout pod. If you have thoughts, comments, or questions you would like to share, please use the chat box to do so. We will address questions that arise during the webinar at a dedicated question and answer period. I will now turn the webinar over to Jim, who will introduce our presenters.
Thank you, Dr. Penkoff. Good afternoon, all, and thank you for joining us for this really important and critical conversation, which is very close to my heart. We are fortunate to have Christopher Jones, or Chris as he prefers to be called, with us today to share his perspective as a young man who was formerly involved in the juvenile, as a juvenile in the adult criminal justice system. Eugenia Telfer-Condi to share her perspective as an aunt and former guardian of a young woman who was involved as a juvenile in the adult system, as well as Grace Bauer, who is the executive director and co-founder of Justice for Families, who hears from families in jurisdictions across the country who are impacted by age of criminal responsibility policies. It should be noted that all three guest speakers are from states who recently passed legislation to raise the age of criminal responsibility. Chris and Eugenia are from New York, and Grace is from Louisiana. In both states, legislation will be phased in, with the first becoming effective in 2018. And here in New York, some of these legislations I've worked on myself. You will find links to the legislation on the Age of Criminal Responsibility Research Training and Technical Assistance Centers online community practice, which we will highlight later on today's presentation. We have three learning objectives today. They are as follows. First, participants will learn about the experiences of a young man who was formerly incarcerated as a juvenile within the adult criminal justice system, the impact of these experiences on him, and the advice he would offer to youth, families, and criminal justice professionals going through similar experiences. Secondly, participants will also learn about the experiences of family member and guardian of a young woman who was also formerly incarcerated as a juvenile within the adult justice system, the challenges she faced, and the advice she would offer to improve the system responses for young people and their families in the future. I would like to share a bit more about our first guest. Chris Jones is currently with the City Service Corps of New York City through the Department of Probation's Young Adult Service Corps. City Service Corps is an American Corps program administered by New York City Service. Chris serves as the Administration Children's Services, where he works within the Juvenile Justice, Youth and Family Office of Juvenile Justice Programs and Services as a peer youth advocate. In his role, Chris works closely with staff to develop opportunities to engage youth from the juvenile justice and foster care systems and leadership programming. The goal of the programming is to develop youth's personal skills to obtain their feedback about agency programs and services. Chris is from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
I will now interview Chris to learn more about his experiences and perspectives as a young man who was involved in the adult criminal justice system as a result of an age of criminal responsibility policy. Thank you for joining us today, Chris.
No problem.
Chris, what was it like being involved in the adult system as a young man?
As a young man in the adult system, it was very scary for me. Like I didn't understand what was going on a lot of the times. I was alone.
You say you didn't understand what was going on. You felt alone. What were some of the particular things as a young man being housed with adults that made you feel alone?
Well, for one, I was not able to communicate with my mother on a regular basis, and it was just like I was amongst older adults as a juvenile, and I was young still, so I felt like I was like vulnerable.
Right.
Away.
Gotcha. Thank you, Chris. Did you understand what was happening when you were arrested?
Not exactly, not legally. I didn't understand. I understood that I did something wrong and that I was going to be punished for it probably, but I didn't understand my rights. I didn't understand that, like, I didn't understand certain things, like why my mother wasn't there with me and whatnot.
Right. So you've already mentioned that one of the things that you experienced as a young man in the adult system is the communication that was cut off between you and your mother, right?
Yes, sir.
Which we know is one of the hardest things for young people to deal with while going through the adult system, not being able to check in with the person who loved them the most, which they love the most.
Yeah.
How would your experience, you think, have differed if you had been in the juvenile justice system?
It would have been different because first of all, I would have been in a detention center, which was not like Rikers Island. Rikers Island, it was an adult jail. So like the process of visitations and the process of me being able to see my family, it was different from being in a detention center where it would be more wanted for me to see my mother and one more. Yeah.
Gotcha. And the living conditions which you encountered at Rikers Island, you know, some of the brutalities and violence that take place there. Do you think that would also be different if you were in the juvenile justice system?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things too. I feel like it would be different because, like in Rikers Island, is a certain type of image that I feel like the youth are trying to portray because of the older people, and because this is what the older people portray, or they feel like this is what is okay to do being on Rikers Island.
Right.
So I feel like it would have been a different impact on my safety. Yes.
And also, how about the communication with your family? You think that would have been perhaps improved in the juvenile justice system?
Yeah, I feel like it would have been improved because I feel like in the juvenile justice system, they still want you to be able to have contact with your family, and they want you to like be able to be in a better position with your parents and whatnot. So so they will want you to do that. They will help you actually to be able to engage with your parents.
And you're referring to the staff that works within the juvenile justice system, all the professionals that work within the juvenile justice system. You're saying that they would have more of an incentive and encourage you to foster a better relationship with your family rather than being in the adult system where it's pretty much you were left to fend for yourself.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for offering your advice, for sharing your perspective, and for offering your advice for our youth and families in the system. We'll get back to you at some point, but now I would like to introduce Eugenia Telford-Condi. Eugenia is a parent, an advocate, an ambassador of service, and a lifelong learner. Eugenia served as the Administration for Children's Services in the Division of Youth and Family Justice. During this experience, she was given the opportunity to explore learning opportunities where she evaluated programming for youth in care and observed workshop offered. Additionally, Eugenia measured outcomes and supported the work of the agency, community-based organizations, and nonprofits that provide services and programs to youth in care. Currently, Eugenia is working with the Family Engagement Team to brainstorm, identify, and develop strategies to engage families. Also, she is the recipient of the Family Development Credential Scholarship, which will contribute greatly to her work and career goals. Moreover, Eugenia believes that her experiences have helped her to identify her life purpose. She is committed to the development process of others as well as helping families navigate challenges and sort out the complexities of their lives to reach their goals. I will now interview Eugenia to learn more about the experiences and perspectives of Eugenia and her needs as she navigated the adult system. Thank you for joining us today, Eugenia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Let's start off with, what was your experience once your niece became involved in the adult system?
When my niece became involved with the adult system, the information that was provided to me was limited. And during her experience in the adult system, she encountered some adults who kind of like educated her about her rights as a pregnant, as a pregnant young adult in the system with a history of mental health. So.
Gotcha. How did you learn about your niece's arrest?
I learned about her arrest immediately because she was in care. She was in a facility up in the Bronx, and they notified me of her arrest.
Gotcha. How did you learn where your niece was being held? I know that question is somehow related to the one earlier, but how's that like for you?
When she was arrested and going through processing for the adult system, I did not know where she was being held. However, the prior arrest, I was aware of it because the borough in which we live, I was aware and knowledgeable about the location where they hold juveniles.
Gotcha. Thank you. Were you offered opportunities to be involved in the questioning/interrogation of your niece?
No, I was not offered the opportunity to be involved in the questioning or interrogation of my niece during her experience with the adult system.
Gotcha. Thank you. Did you feel that your niece's legal rights were protected?
Yes, I do feel like her rights were protected.
Is that because I'm assuming she had an attorney that was assigned to her?
Yes.
Do you feel like the communication with the attorney was helpful and clear? Did her lawyer help you to understand the process? Is that a part of why you felt like her rights were being protected?
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you. Well, the next question is if she had access to a lawyer, which we already know she did. At what point in the process did legal services become available to your niece?
I don't remember exactly, but I know that it was early on in the process.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to be involved in any meetings with the lawyer?
No, I did not have the opportunity to be involved in any meetings with a lawyer at all.
Okay. How did you learn about any movement of your niece to different facilities as she was being transferred back and forth to various places?
I learned about my niece moving to different facilities because she would either contact me and let me know that she has moved, or her new case manager will reach out to me to gather information to complete the file or notes that they have to take.
Did she, your niece herself, take initiative to reach out to you?
Yes, like we had a really close relationship, and yeah.
Okay, that's great. Did you feel that your niece understood the seriousness of the charges, potential sanctions, and collateral consequences of being found / pleading guilty? Do you feel like she truly comprehended the circumstances that she was in?
No, I don't feel like she understood the seriousness of the charges.
And then you think that has something to do with her age and
the
development of her, brain and how she's able to comprehend the legal system?
Yes.
Gotcha. Were you involved in court processes?
In the adult case, no. However, approval was needed for certain things because of her mental health history.
Right.
And during the juvenile case, yes. And also after she transitioned into a mother and child program, upon her release from the adult system, I was continuously involved.
Right. Now, you mentioned that she had a mental health history, which we know that a lot of our young people in the system suffer from some sort of mental health issues, right? So, for example, there's a study that just came out that I think 55% of the young people on Rikers Island has experienced some level of brain trauma. Something severe has happened to them, which obviously contributes to some of the behaviors. Do you think that in a strange way, her mental health issues might have helped the process? Maybe there was some leniency on her, or do you think it made things a little bit more challenging? Were the facilities even able to provide mental health services to her?
No, the facility was not able to provide mental services to her. However, they would contact me periodically, like if she would have an episode or if they couldn't control her, they would seek out and ask for permission to take her to a therapeutic setting,
right,
for evaluation.
Gotcha. And yesterday we had a conversation. You mentioned to me how some of the older folks who were in facilities with her mentored her and give us some strategies on how to sort of maneuver through the system.
Yes.
You were saying some specific things. Do you want to touch on that a little bit about the pregnancy?
I'll share.
Yeah.
So upon entry into the adult system, she was attacked by another one of the residents.
Right.
And her response was to respond to the act, right? So she was no longer the victim. She became the aggressor, right? So within that, her age also, like, kind of played a major role. And the case manager at the time was kind of like encouraging like termination because
termination of a pregnancy?
Yes, because I guess because of the mental capacity, and I guess they didn't feel like she was capable. However, during her contact into the system, the adults that engaged in conversation with her kind of like encouraged her and
encouraged her to keep the child.
Yes. And also gave her alternatives, like in different things that, like, and kind of educated her about different things she can do. And I don't know, I'm not sure if she shared, like, what her charges was. But immediately they offered a mother and child program to her. So.
Okay, gotcha. That's an interesting dynamic, right? Because on one hand, her age and the fact that she was around people who are older than her could be sort of like a disadvantage, right? Because then she has to protect herself.
And
then on the other end, you might have someone who's older and been through the system who would then give you some feedback that can be either helpful or not helpful. So it's really interesting. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
What advice, well, I'm sorry, let's backtrack a little bit. What impact did this experience have on your niece and your family, would you say? And I know that's a loaded question.
Yes, it is. It's easy to point out the negative things, but to speak about something positive, like the experience was very uncomfortable and very frustrating, but it also strengthened my relationship with my niece as well as my family. As well, and also the workers, like, that came after. It kind of, allowed me to keep an open mind.
Gotcha. And so the next question is two parts, but I will try to mix them together, which, Chris, I'll also ask you the same question myself, which I missed earlier. If you were, if I write you $1 million check to give advice to families who are currently going through the same circumstances which your family went through, and also if you were supposed to give the same advice or whatever advice you deem appropriate or helpful to professionals about supporting families going through the process which you went through, what would you say to them? So it's a two-part question. First, you're speaking to families about this journey and giving them some words of encouragement and advice. And the second part is you're doing the same thing for professionals and experts about supporting and aiding families going through the circumstances which you went through.
Okay, so the advice that I will offer to families going through the same experience is to partner and collaborate with the young adult and the professionals that are engaged with your family, and to communicate with them and share with them what it is that you need, to ask a lot of questions and to share challenges you may have, because their role is to provide support, to listen to you, and to share skills and resources and advocate for you when necessary. And if I was to give advice or offer advice to a criminal justice professional about supporting families going through this experience, I would say to remember that the families that you're working with are no different from your own, and that all families deserve to be respected and supported by the professionals who's working with them to gather information about their family. And also to be patient with them and to believe that there are strengths within all, and to be patient with the process and don't judge them based off the information you receive about them. To partner with them and to identify areas where they may need support, collaborate with them and the information will flow.
Right.
And to remember that families are more than just case notes and deadlines.
Wow, that's profound. That's a lot to unpack there, but pretty much I've heard that families, there's a gentleman that has this saying that says that those closer to the problems are closer to the solutions. And from what I'm hearing from you is exactly what you're saying, that families come with strength. They are strong. They know what they need. They're looking for partners. They're not looking for a sense of paternalism of people telling them what to do.
Absolutely.
And that those families, the challenges which they have, are similar to challenges most families have. It may just be that they may not have the financial means to perhaps get a therapist or move out of certain neighborhoods, but nonetheless, they're still families, and that we should separate issues from individuals, right?
Absolutely.
You have institutions sometimes are meant to address certain issues, and so we can't always allow institutions to just view individuals as those issues.
Right.
Am I right or wrong?
You're right.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eugenia,
You're
for
welcome.
sharing your perspective. I missed Chris earlier regarding this very same important question. So, Chris, before I move on to Grace, I just want to go back to you real quick to ask you the same question, right? If you were giving, if I was the Senator St. Germain and I said, hey, Chris, would you give me some advice regarding young people going through the same process which you've went through, and also professionals who are working with them? What would that advice be?
Well, my advice to the youth that's going through these situations, I would tell them like not to give up on yourselves, because there's plenty of times where I was going through the situation. I feel like this is where I was going to be at forever, so I just gave up and I just continued to go down the same path that I was going down. But as I continued my life and as I turned my life around, I was able to learn to ask for help, because that's one of the biggest things that we had problems with.
Right.
I had problems with asking for help. So by asking for help, you gain opportunities, and capitalizing on opportunities and becoming the best person that you can be.
Right.
That's my advice for the youth. Towards the professionals, I would say to give the youth a chance and an opportunity to grow, and that takes time. So that's all I would say. Like, give them the time and also the tools that they need. Like, I feel, because from experiences, me in programs, I've been in a program and I was able to get my OSHA card, but with the OSHA card, I wasn't given an opportunity to work in a construction site through the program. I actually had to get that on my own. Right. And there's a lot of youth that's not as persistent with me, so that therefore they will not go out there and look for that. Right,
which is as critical. So pretty much is that stay consistent and be patient with our young people.
Yes.
And they do change, they do better, and that even when we provide services and help to them and give them some tools, we still need to be there in the long haul to help them apply those skills that they've learned.
Give them the opportunity to use those tools.
Exactly, give them opportunities, and that's what that counts. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. Now I would like to introduce Grace Bow. Grace's personal experiences with her son in the juvenile justice system have made her a dedicated advocate, organizer, and an especially impassioned public speaker. Grace has served on a special education advocate with families, helping families of Southwest Louisiana, and an organizer and the subsequent director of the Lake Charles chapter of Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. In 2011, Grace joined Zachary Norris to build Justice for Families, where she now serves as the executive director. In her role at the Justice for Families, Grace has focused on creating a network to link families and the Justice for Families, families and their organizations, planning and building of a shared learning environment for families, leadership development of families, and through reform of policies and practice, greater awareness of critical need for family voice and power of all decision-making points in the juvenile and adult justice system. I will now interview the great Grace Bauer to learn more about the type of support family members often seek when learning how to navigate the adult system and advocate for their children within it. Thank you for joining us today, Grace.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing. I know that there's a lot of work to be done all across the country, but particularly in Louisiana. So I'm honored to know that there are individuals like yourself taking on these hard challenges. So again, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. So Grace, I will start by asking you, the first question is, how common is it for families of youth who are in the adult system as a result of an age of criminal responsibility policy set under 18 years of age to contact Justice for Families for assistance?
We're a national organization. We have about 3,500 family members across the country that are a part of our organization. And the majority of those families do come to us because their child's been charged as an adult. And we find there are two major driving factors behind that. It's the length of time that these young people are often involved in the system, and also the lack of information. So I've heard the other two presenters that I'm honored to present with today talk about that their families didn't have the information they needed. They had a hard time getting the information they needed, and they weren't sure where to turn to get all of that. So those are the two major reasons we find that that's the majority of families that contact us.
Thank you, Grace. Really appreciate it. Now, is it for law enforcement agency / criminal justice system to reach out to your organization for support? How common is it for them to also reach out to you?
Sadly, not many. Very few adult systems have reached out to us. Only now in the juvenile justice system in the last few years have you seen a more intentional focus on engaging, involving, and partnering with families. And so the juvenile justice system is just now embracing the concept that we should do it. And still there's a long way to go on that front because it's such a new concept to the juvenile justice system. And there's just not much, at least from our experience. I know that they do reach out to others. The Vera Institute for Justice has worked with a lot of adult systems. But
right.
For us, we haven't had that experience at all.
Gotcha. Thank you. What other family advocacy organizations are there around the country who provide similar types of support? I know you just mentioned Vera, but other than Vera, any other organizations?
Justice for Families is a little bit different in terms of a support organization because the organization was actually founded and built by families that have been impacted by the criminal and juvenile justice system. So It's a different type of support that we offer. It's pretty unique. So there's not a lot of groups like ours in particular, and we're the only one at the national level that does it. There are some in other states, and we have a full listing of partner organizations on our website that folks are welcome to look at.
And what's the website, Grace?
www.justice4families, FAMILIES.org.
Thank you. And I just want to go back quickly. So you just to be clear, so your organization is run by mostly individuals who've been personally impacted by the system, right?
Correct. All of our staff, we do a lot of system trainings. Most of our board, majority of our board members are people that have been impacted by the justice system.
That is powerful. It's amazing. Thank you. As I've mentioned earlier, regarding those closer to the issues are usually closer to the solutions. I think the model you have there is a model which many organizations around the country can learn from in terms of ensuring that those who are being impacted on a regular basis are in the room and have a voice in the decision-making process, which is also why I'm thankful for this webinar, having individuals such as Chris and Eugenia and yourself to be able to share your expertise in these areas. So thank you for that. Do you believe there are enough of such organizations to meet the needs of families around the country?
I don't believe there are, and I feel like that's because there's really not a dedicated structure or funding mechanism for the type of support that Justice for Families provides, which is, that peer-to-peer support, someone who's been there before. What little communication families will often find with attorneys is often so filled with legal jargon and
Right.
the whole, they throw the whole legal book at you, but it's
Right.
not understandable language to families, and oftentimes we find just being able to break down what they've been told by attorneys
Right.
in a very short conversation, you end up providing something that they didn't have before.
Right, right. That's critical. I remember one of the things I talked about in my book is when I remember going through this process, 90% of the things my attorney was saying, I did not understand. The only
Right.
thing I remember about her was that how she made me feel. She made me feel cared for. And that at the moment, because I didn't understand anything else, meant more to me anyway. But the ability to, again, maneuver around the legal jargon and realizing that the law is more than just an intellectual exercise is critical. So, again, I just want to thank you for echoing that. What are the most common concerns you hear from parents/guardian of youth in the adult criminal justice system, Grace?
Well, it's kind of just what I said. It's that lack of understanding, a lack of structure to go to where you can find the information you need. And it's such a confusing thing. I mean, you have a child, they're under the age of 18, they're in every other aspect. If, they break the law, they're treated as a young person, they're treated in the juvenile system. But in this case, all of a sudden a child that's still a child is being treated as an adult.
Right.
It's an entirely, even if you've been involved in the juvenile justice system, you immediately recognize there are significant differences between what you would see in the JJ system and where you're at now.
Right, right. And then one of the things I like to mention is the insanity behind charging young people as adults. When you think of the mere fact that most of these young people won't even be able to serve on a jury, which is a direct link to the criminal justice system. So they won't even be able to be a part of the justice process for their peers, but yet somehow they are able to charge as adult, as you just mentioned. So I get that.
That's a great point.
Yep.
Great point.
What resources do most families often seek from you, Grace?
Information, what's happening. That's a very, I don't understand what's happened here. That's the first big thing is kind of what's happened, how is this allowed to happen. Yep. We recently interviewed 20 mothers that are kind of new to our organization, and every single one of them said that until they found J4F, no one else had ever bothered to answer their questions or even listen to their concerns, and most said that they had called at least 2 or 3 other groups seeking answers before they found us. I thought that was really telling that, you have a system that's set up and the young person's legal rights should be protected, but the families, we know that doesn't always happen. And then there's very few people to actually provide that information. And they're also seeking support. Having a child involved in either of the systems, there packs a lot of guilt and, what did I do wrong that my child is in this situation? So it's, they're looking to tell their story. They're wanting to be heard, and they're wanting to understand what's happening. And then they also want to know, what do we do? What are we supposed to do? No one's told us what to do.
Right. That's profound. Thank you. What support does Justice for Families need to be best support and advocate for families? What are some of the things you feel like you need that allows you to keep going and doing this work that you're doing in Louisiana and across the country?
We provide a Family Leadership Institute for families each year that's at no cost to families, and it's specifically designed around the specific needs of families, their unique needs. Many hold down full-time jobs and have other children to care for, so this is something that we do where there's no cost around it. We make sure all your travel arrangements are taken care of. And the Leadership Institute gives families a chance to see that they're not alone in this and to build relationships with other families that have come in, had a similar experience, to meet with them face to face, to share some of the challenges that they've experienced. And it's a very non-judgmental atmosphere where most families talk to us about experiencing a significant amount of stigma from both their church communities and their immediate families. That's two of the places that we typically turn to when we're in difficult life situations, but yet because of the criminal justice stigma around it, they don't feel comfortable turning there. So I think there's really a need, as I mentioned earlier, for a designated structure and a designated funding mechanism for this type of support and information sharing.
Wow, that is so critical. And, it's something I didn't think about myself. I mean, you've mentioned that if the church and your family members are the ones you usually turn to, and then now all of a sudden you can't turn to them because of stigmas and other issues, then who do you have left, right?
Right, exactly.
That's important. And so what about you yourself and your organization? I don't know if I missed that answer. What is it that you think you need? I'm assuming that to be able to provide this service to families takes effort, and it takes fundings, and it takes a lot of work on your behalf. So what is it that Justice for Families need to best support these families to continue doing the retreats and the work that you're doing?
I think Justice for Families has been really fortunate to have got in and do a lot of system-wide trainings for juvenile justice professionals. And so that's been a big part of our work. But in terms of the one-on-one support that families need, and this can often be a long, drawn-out experience, and it's constantly changing and shifting, and new things happen in court, or your child gets moved to a different facility, and you have to, learn to navigate it. I think that's a kind of long-term support that families need that, as a small organization, we're not capable of providing it. We're lucky that we have a large, extensive network of volunteers that do help. But it would be so nice to be able to have the money to help those folks do it.
Professionally. Gotcha. Thank you, Grace. And lastly, what advice would you offer to criminal justice professionals about supporting families whose children are involved in the adult system? I know you might have touched on that already. You're just that good where you're able to foresee the questions. But specifically, what advice would you have for folks like us?
I think that the system's intention, the criminal justice system's intention, is to stop the high numbers that we see return to prison every year. Then more attention has to be paid to those that have the greatest ability to support these young people, and that's their families. We seem to accept as society that we don't have money for that kind of thing, but I totally disagree with that notion. I think we choose to spend our money on the cages. The research has shown to be ineffective. I think the idea of supporting and engaging families to help their own loved ones, their own children, with the supports they need in their community and groups like ours that can provide that peer-to-peer support is a direction we need to be turning in. I mean, I just don't know how much longer as a country we can continue to sustain something that's proven to be a really bad idea and not really giving us many results. Right. And positive results.
Right. And thank you, Grace. I was reading a study recently, and it was particularly about New Orleans, as you mentioned, how we choose to make certain decisions. And it was referring to how I think 56% of the young men in New Orleans are out of work. And they found out that there was a direct connection between those youngsters who are unemployed and those youngsters who are also being a part of the violent culture that's taking New Orleans by storm. And I don't think those things are somehow a coincidence. So as you've mentioned, I think we can do better, and I'm hoping that we will. So thank you for sharing your insight, and I think your insight will help us and allow us to do better. And thank you for doing the amazing work that you're doing. And just quickly, Chris wanted to add one more thing before I turn it over to Dr. Pencroff.
Yeah, based off the question that you had asked me before,
Right.
with the what would be the difference between the being housed in the
adult system versus the juvenile justice system?
And I would say to that I would say the education, and because I was, even though I was like allowed to go to a school
Right.
on Rikers Island,
Right.
I wasn't able to focus on my schooling because I was focused more on my safety,
Right.
on how to maneuver through the school floor.
Right.
So I feel like it would be different at a detention center because it would be more focused on getting us that diploma and
Right.
getting our careers.
Right, and this is connected to this conversation we're just having. If education is the greatest equalizer and you're in a place where you're thinking about your safety and whether you can be alive or not, it's really hard for your 16-year-old brain to also focus on math and science.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not even just a juvenile or / adult issue, but it's even in certain communities, right? If survival is always at the forefront of your mind, then how can you really focus on getting an education? So that was very important, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Dr. Pencroff, I hope I'm not missing anything. I would like to thank Grace for sharing her perspective and for offering her advice. And thank you everyone for the work that you're doing. And we will now move to our question and answer sessions.
Thank you very much, Jim. You've done a fantastic job, and thank you to Chris, Eugenia, and Grace. We do have some questions that are coming into the chat box. There's one for Chris. It says, in what ways have you been able to get the help you needed after you experienced Rikers Island?
One of the biggest ways that I was able to get help was through probation. I would say probation. Once I obtained probation, they gave me a bunch of different programs and different, like first and foremost they asked me what I wanted to do in life and where I wanted to be. At the time I was doing construction, so they were more directing me towards construction jobs and whatnot.
Right. So probation can be a tool for good or elsewhere.
Yes.
That's amazing. Thank you, Chris. Are there any other questions, Dr. Pencroff?
Yes, I was just going to say, Chris, related to that, can you share how your experiences have impacted what you're doing now and what you do now in your work?
Yes. My experience in being arrested in multiple programs and whatnot, it helps me out, with credibility with the young people that I see on the regular, as it do help me understand the position that they're in, because I've been in that position and I know I kind of understand where they're coming from when they say the certain things that they need, such as the education. When in the school committee that we're in, they're being grouped together to learn, be based off of the program that they're in and not based off of the grade level that they're on. And I understand that because that's one of the things that I had to go through being in the program.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it is county-level probation within New York City that you were involved in and that you now work to support. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much. We have a question for Eugenia. It says, in what ways do you feel family can better support incarcerated youth family members while they're incarcerated and after they get out of jail or prison?
The best way, I guess, to support is to just keep them informed and to just basically like support and just be there, like to listen to them and, you know, listen to their challenges and, you know, some of the things that they are challenged with. And what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're speaking to it. How can they better support youth while they're detained as well as once they are released? And so I think you've spoken to the importance of consistency and realizing that change takes time, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And also upon release, like in my experience with my niece, like upon release, sometimes they're released and they have these programs that they need to attend, or they have all of these different conditions, but no one comes to follow up or to support them in that. And sometimes I noticed, especially with my own niece, that she was not prepared and she was not ready, like, for some of the programming. But I think if it was more support around the family and it was more information provided, or just maybe kind of like understanding like what she needed at that moment, and just kind of like the consistency, because after she was released, like, no one followed up and, you know, to see how she was doing, or if we needed any advocacy as far as school, because school was like the #1 challenge. Like her coming out of the facility and then entering back into a community school, like that was my biggest challenge, because I remember a time when they put her into a setting and she was actually pregnant, but she was getting teased because when she went back into the community school, she's, 16, 17, but she's in a 9th grade class. You know, and it wasn't, and then she came to the point where she said, I don't want to go to school. So she would say, and during that period, she was still on probation. So when she would come in and they would ask, like, why are you not attending school? You know, that's a violation. You know what I mean? So, so that would become a violation, but no one was looking at the issue, you know, that was causing the behavior. And and the problem was the fact that she was being teased, but no one paid attention to that. The focus was on her not attending school.
Right.
You know?
Right. Rather than figuring out why. I think that's so powerful in the young people that I've worked with, is behavior is communication. What's behind the behavior? They're trying to tell us something, and if we listen, we can usually find alternatives.
Exactly.
Thank you, Eugenia. We've got a couple more questions, and then I know we need to turn it over to NTTAC.
Okay.
One is a quick one, I think, for Grace, and is there a Justice for Families group in Massachusetts?
It's not a formal group, but there is a group of families there who just went through our Family Leadership Institute, and if you contact me, I'd be happy to put you in touch with them.
Okay, and please everybody notice that I did put the Justice for Families link in the chat box, so that information is there. We have a question about how are youth securing safe and affordable housing after they transition out of the justice system. And I know that's a national issue, particularly if someone does have a record housing and their ability to apply for safe and affordable housing can be impacted. Is there anyone on our panel who feels comfortable speaking about that particular issue?
Well, it's one of those challenges I've worked on myself. I mean, let's just take a look at New York City, a place where even if you do not have a record and you have a job that pays you a minimum wage, you still probably would not be able to afford even what we consider to be affordable housing here. And when you add a criminal record and other issues and affordability issues to that, it's almost impossible. You know, you have laws around, even when it comes to public housing, that sort of like disqualifies you from trying to get public housing if you have a record or if you've done certain things. And there are laws where a family may lose their apartment if somehow another family member was arrested doing something within the vicinity of that house. So right now we currently have 60,000 homeless people in New York City, and half of those are children who are currently in school. And we don't even have, there's a huge discussion now around gentrification and affordable housing and so many things that you can only imagine that if you're a person who's coming out the system, you're sort of like at the bottom of that conversation. So if you're referring to other youths who have other challenges that exacerbate the housing crisis we have here. So it's a very loaded question, Dr. Pankoff, and it's much bigger than just people who are involved in the criminal justice system, but especially for those who are involved in the criminal justice system.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim. And I want to be sensitive to people's time here. There are a couple more questions that have come into the chat box, and I will make sure I follow up with our specific presenters and the individuals who've asked those questions to provide that. Additionally, what I want to do is first, of course, thank our presenters for their time and for sharing how having a juvenile involved in the adult system has impacted them or the families that they serve. I also want to just orient people to the fact that we do have an online community of practice where continued conversations can occur, and that information is in the slides. And so just more information there. And we do, at the end of the presentation, have a link where we'd like you to weigh in on how you felt about the presentation today, as well as ideas you might have for our 5th webinar in the series, one of which could be maybe collateral consequences such as housing. But again, thank you to Jim, to Chris, to Eugenia, and to Grace. And Adam and William, I'll now turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Pankoff. And I would like to also thank our presenters for a great discussion on this topic. And we just have a few brief announcements for everyone. As a reminder, the webinar recording will be archived in approximately 1 week on OJJDP's NTTAC YouTube channel. And supporting resources can be obtained by contacting OJJDP's Help Desk. And for more information, you can contact the following information and the following providers with the Age of Criminal Responsibility Research Training and Technical Assistance Center. And lastly, you may also contact OJJDP or NTTAC via Help Desk by following contact information on the previous slide that we had up, but it's also available in our handouts as well, our contact information. But lastly, we would appreciate if you take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey that we have for you all. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.